Good evening, Dungeon Masters, I'm Baradara. While YouTube has tons of advice on how to DM through specific problems, seldom does one find videos discussing a process for analyzing our gaming experience in order to rapidly improve our DMing. And even if that video does exist, it likely wouldn't allow the Dungeon Master to define what good dungeon mastery looks like for themselves. Fortunately for you, however, this is that process. After each game session's completion, take time to think through and write down the things you recall as pain points or frustrations during the game. Worksheets for these exercises are in the description, by the way. Take time to reflect on specifically what went well, and note down those events also. Observe the elements of the game which led to each session's frustration or fun as you take notes. For example, if you identify a particular combat encounter as having been boring, write down why you think that is. Was the boredom caused due to a mechanic's misunderstanding and constant rule checking, or was it just a hit point slog? As for the enjoyable parts of the game, were those encounters, for example, specifically fun because of a number of great dice checks, or was a particular player in a thespian groove? Finally, think of a possible solution for the problems your game session had and write down what those possible solutions are. Likewise, whatever circumstances led to the enjoyable parts of the game, think through and note what you can do to replicate those same moments. Continue repeating this process for every game session until you have a half dozen of these worksheets. At that time, it's important to analyze them as a set. Look for recurring pain points or similar fun events over the course of your game's history. If you find you're running poor combats every other session, you may discover this only happens when a flaky player finally decides to show up, or what you thought was a series of great role-playing instances actually has more to do with the players being rewarded tons of gold. Further, try really hard to look for the patterns in your notes which might seem totally disconnected at first glance. It's easy to discount events as non-correlated, but that's specifically why you should take time for the extra retrospection just to be sure. Continue repeating this holistic review of your notes every 6 to 8 game sessions, and think through how your dungeon mastering habits and abilities change over time. Reviewing your sessions in this way is powerful because you get to decide your own definition of good DMing, and over time refine that definition as well. After you finish a campaign or large story arc, it's important to gut check yourself and see if the players agree with these dungeon mastering analyses you've been iterating over. Take time to call each player individually and ask them a few questions about the campaign. Specifically, find out what they liked best about the story, but also ask them what they found the most frustrating. Ask them if there's anything you could do better as a DM, and if there was anything they felt as a player they could have done better, and how you could facilitate that. When conducting these interviews, do your best to stay quiet and let the players speak. Pay attention as well to what the players didn't mention that you believe you struggled with or were proud of, and ask yourself why that might be the case. It's possible you may have been devoting tons of mental energy to solve a problem or reinforce a game style your players don't really care about. As a further detail, by speaking to each player individually, you give them a safe space to confidently share these observations and therefore accrue responses with less bias. Lastly, all of these player responses are valuable. Write them down and make note of which topics they didn't bring up as well. That is, the ones you believe you needed improvement on. Once you've collected these player observations, review them along with your own session notes. Reflect on why the player observations are or aren't consistent with your own. Further, as you review all these notes over the course of a campaign, it becomes easier to analyze your comprehensive gaming experience. For example, you may discover through this process your table doesn't like a specific mechanic's interplay. Therefore, a small house rule might increase the enjoyment of the game. Lots of dungeon masters create house rules because they feel something is narratively missing, but seldom do they reflect on how those rules have an impact on the game's enjoyment. By the way, if you find that describing your game world is what's holding your DMing back, the sponsor of this video is here to help. Describe is a searchable database filled with hundreds of environment and character descriptions primed to enable your inspiration. In fact, let's find out what Describe says about me. Fineries drape the statuesque noble's form, comprising a wide array of fabrics from lands both known and distant. He carries himself with an air of easy superiority, a confidence born of wealth and power, of responsibility and influence. A signet ring adorns one finger, engraved with their house's coat of arms, a reminder of where they belong and where they serve. Should I send signet-sealed thank you letters to patrons who also sign up for Describe? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, if you want to push your narration to the next level, visit the link below and use the coupon code BARON for 10% off when you sign up. Now, back to the video. Before you start your next campaign, it's important to take stock of what adventures you intend to run. This is especially true if you're running pre-written modules. As you review your intended content, think through the planned encounters which you believe run counter to your own personal definition of good dungeon mastering. Think through what would likely happen if you left those aspects intact, and what minimal tweaks you could make to those encounters to improve them. Similarly, make note of any content you feel represents your good dungeon mastering definition. Doing this exercise serves as a litmus test of your prior campaign's self-analysis. Will the game aspects you believe will lead to enjoyable moments actually do so when the dice start rolling? This iterative analysis process will help you understand your strengths and weaknesses as a dungeon master and help formulate your own personal definition of good dungeon mastery. If you'd like to help me make more content like this in the future, please consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a channel member. Thanks for watching, Dungeon Masters, and until next time, good night.